What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Bonus Point Rugby podcast. Today is a big one. We are diving deep into international rugby with a special look at the All Blacks squad, the All Blacks 15 squad, and the Wallabies as well as they gear up for their northern tours. And we have a very special guest today, someone who I've had the pleasure of working with over the past couple of years. He is a massive advocate for Northern American rugby, and he is putting a lot of Major League Rugby, a lot of other people on the map, and he's doing some great work as well. I'm really excited to have him on the Bonus Point because I've been on his podcast, the Rugby Rant, many times. Rob, the Hammerschmidt, good to have you on, mate. How are you?
It's an absolute pleasure to be on the Bonus Point. You're one of those guys that we at the Rugby Rant look up to, look forward to having as a guest, and truly appreciate as a fan of rugby. So it's always good to join your show just simply because it's such an honor.
Thank you, brother. No, I appreciate that. And I'd say it wholeheartedly that we get some pretty cool opportunities in America, but the work that you're doing to grow the game and like put people in a spotlight to really make sure that by the time, 2031 rolls around when we have the World Cup here, we've got all these massive fans that have been started or have at least had a lot of good information and content started right there at the Rugby Rants. Speaking of things that you've been working on, though, you've been working on a pretty big event down in Chicago, getting ready for this All Blacks test that we're going to have. And we are talking about the match over at Reggie's Bar. So tell us a little bit about this, Rob. I know we've spoken a little bit about this on the Rugby Rant, but what about this is going to be so exciting for fans when they come to Chicago for the All Blacks test versus Ireland?
Well, it's a place that you can hang out even if you don't have a ticket. You can come to Reggie's early in the morning, start pre-gaming. I believe the Springboks will be playing in the morning. There's going to be live music. There's going to be drinking games. There's going to be all sorts of tomfoolery. And the Rugby Rant podcast show will have a lot of special guests, chiefly your own Bonus Point podcaster, TJ Olson. He's going to be joining the show. We're going to do an hour-long podcast. It's going to be the second time that Scott and I have actually joined together live in person to do a podcast together, and it's going to be the first time that we've done it live. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to have some good guests. One of our good mates, David Fee, former international for the United States, played in the 2004 World Cup, was going to be joining us on stage. He's a good mate of mine. He's going to be joining us. We're going to have lots of other great guests, and it's going to be just an absolute cracking good time. And folks, here's going to be the feature. Every guest that comes on will have to share their best rugby story prior to getting on the show, right? So we're going to have a good crack in that day, and then we're going to enjoy a great game in the afternoon/evening.
Awesome. No, thank you for that information because, I was telling you on the Rugby Rant on Monday, it's going to be difficult because we've got a couple of days ahead on Thursday and Friday when I come into Chicago, catching up with a few mates, and I told you I'm going to try and make sure I'm alive, I'm coherent, I'm ready to make this pod epic. So it's going to be a good time, but I can't wait to check out Reggie's. I've heard a lot of good things from you, from other people who are Chicago natives. It's going to be great.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. There's going to be a lot of fun to be had. And TJ, the great thing for somebody like you as a fan of the All Blacks, those guys can move around the city with relative ease. They like to come to Chicago. Every time they've been here, they've actually been in and around the city. And because rugby's not huge here yet, they enjoy getting themselves around, going out, having a coffee, going out and taking in the city, and they're identifiable. You can find them, you can chat with them. And they're keen to have a good crack with fans who love them here in the States.
Okay, well, I can't wait. Well, if anybody is around for the All Blacks test in Chicago, November 1st, if you aren't going to the game or if you are going to the game, come down to Reggie's. We'll check everything out and it's going to be a good time. But speaking of the All Blacks, let's start with that big one. We want to talk about this All Blacks 2025 squad. Scott Barrett, again, back as captain. Artie Savia, back as vice captain. And then we also have Beauden Barrett pulling the strings at age 34. So when we are talking about this squad, Rob, I know you've been watching a lot of the Rugby Championship. I know you are just a big rugby fan in general. Just for general sake, when you first saw this squad, what was your initial reaction to this team?
So the first thing I would say is I've always had a concern, at least within the last year, of the All Blacks and the fact that there's we know that to be successful in a World Cup, and I'm talking, of course, about 2027, you need to have about over 500 caps in your squad of 33. That's never really an issue for the likes of New Zealand, England, South Africa. Australia is a little bit young right now, but for those big teams, it's not really an issue. My concern for the All Blacks over the last year is, when are they going to start to blood some new players in their squad and start to build the coherency and consistency that they're going to need to be competitive in 2027 in Australia? I look at the squad and I say, we're starting to see Razor trickle in and get some of those young players that have started to be features in the squad more caps, okay? So that they're, by the time 2 years from now hits, they are full on, full-blooded mainstay All Blacks. But then we're starting to see new blood come into the squad and become that will be allowed to grow into their status, grow into to being featured player within the All Black squad. And that's what I love to see. So honestly, on this tour, for the All Blacks, results always matter, especially to the to New Zealand faithful.
Mhm.
Results always matter, but for me, it's less about the results, and it's more about the players getting capped, players getting experience, building the continuity. My biggest concern is at fly half. You know, do they have that experience that they're going to need? Yes, they obviously do with Barrett McKenzie. My biggest concern is what's next. 2 years time, Bowden Barrett's going to be 36.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Damian McKenzie is going to be probably 32, 33. I don't know his age off the cuff right now. Will they have the depth that is going to be required? I mean, look back to 2011.
Mm-hmm. Loaded with talent. You could still go to places where Stephen Donald was fishing and going to get them to finish off a World Cup final. But no, I totally agree with you. I definitely think we are struggling a bit in that department, and we haven't given players the opportunity to blood in that sense, in that particular position. I think we've done little spurts here and there where we are getting new players injected into the squad. I'm thinking of guys like your Leroy Carter's on the wings, who's had tremendous Super Rugby seasons, and he's come into the squad and he's having a cracker of a time. Couple players here and there, like a Kyle Preston, who is a young halfback who's just had another cracker of a season, and he was I think either a carpenter or a concreter 2 years ago, and now he's in the conversation to be one of the starting scrum halves behind Cam Roygaard. So, yep, I wholeheartedly agree. I think in regards to the 10s stocks, we have some promise. Ruben Love, who's predominantly played fullback, he can play 10. We also have the guys like Rivers Rayhana and a couple players coming through the NPC, your Josh Jacobs and that sort. But I wholeheartedly agree. Once we get to 2027, if, knock on wood, an injury happens to a Bowden Barrett or a Damian McKenzie, who are we going to go to that has the experience?
Yeah, and so, like, conversely, I think if you go back a year to 2 years, Nugget was moving on, right? Looking for a bit of a payday. And a lot of All Blacks fans were left standing there going, well, who's his heir apparent? Who replaces him? And I think there were a lot of question marks. Well, I don't think we have those question marks, barring some health concerns, right? I know that Riorgard's had some health concerns. Christie's battled his own challenges in that department as well, if I'm not mistaken. But I think the position, barring health issues, is fairly settled. They have a nice core of 9s right now. I think for me, you want to go into that year prior to the World Cup saying, like, with almost to the point where all fans sit down and go, yeah, I could name off the first 15 right now without question.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even have to look at the list. I know who's going to be on that first 15 list. You have to know that going into the World Cup. And I think right now with what Razor's doing with the squad, they'll have their answers in a year's time. That's why this tour is important, not necessarily the results and a Grand Slam. If indeed you would call it a Grand Slam. Are you calling it the Grand Slam? That's the big controversy.
I'm kind of a bit against that name of the tour. Like, I don't really enjoy it. I like it being the Northern Tour and what is the Aussies call it, the Spring Tour, the Grand Slam Tour. Yeah, I don't know. It's a bit of an interesting choice.
Yeah. And, obviously with the Ireland match being in the States, can you call it an actual battle against home nations? I'd go the other way. I would say yes. And the reason I'd say yes is because I was at that All Blacks Ireland match back in 2000. What was that, 2016?
To
Does that sound right? Yeah. And that was probably 80% Ireland fans.
God, I can't. I'm not looking forward to this. This is going to be terrible.
But it was great. It was great. And that's just it too, is the Kiwi fans traveled swimmingly and they were brilliant to meet. They were the traveling groups that were coming for that match. And I can imagine the same is going to hold true from 2 weeks time. The people were absolutely beautiful to talk to it. And just because of the joined love of rugby, they were giving away Kiwi pins and they were giving away all sorts of other things to little kids to inspire them to love the game. And that's what a tour is really about, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I can't wait. If it was anything like the score didn't really reflect very well with the USA game, 100 points to 7. But
No, yeah.
when I went out afterwards, being able to converse with people not only who understood what I was saying because everybody else had an accent, but it was just such a vibe. It was so much fun. It was the ability to get to connect with people from other states, from other countries who came all the way to go watch an All Blacks game in America. It was phenomenal. But you touched on a good point. It's you were talking about the starting 15, and I think that is, you're 100% right. We've got our players. We know who that starting 15 is. But I think the one thing that I like to point out in recent All Blacks tests is that we have had a really big struggle in the 5 of the 6 losses under Robertson. The All Blacks were ahead at halftime. So we know that the starting 15 can get the job done. It all comes down to the bench. And the one issue I see, especially with recent injuries, is the locking department. Wales and Scotland are ranked, 12th and 9th, respectively. Ireland and England are top 5 ranked opponents, and they're going to bring trouble and aggression and a lot of heavy firepower when it comes to these games. So if you've got Tupou Vaa'i out, you've got other guys like Patrick Tuipulotu, who was a humongous cog in our play off the bench. You've got to look at who we've got coming into the mix as well. And I enjoy these players, but I'm feeling a bit uneasy about it because we've got Josh Lord, who's been in the mix since 2001. We've got Sam Derry, who had a great season in 2024, played a bit in the Rugby Championship, but only had limited minutes. So I'm not feeling good about our locking department at the moment, and that is really a humongous piece to what a Northern Hemisphere team brings. When you're thinking about that, the struggles that we have, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'd agree. And I'm going to add on to my concern with, to me, Cody Taylor, first of all, he's a absolute legend, right? Interestingly, when he first came into the All Black squad, I really was not a Cody Taylor fan. I was much more, had a lot more confidence in Colsey, right? I had a ton more confidence in Colsey, but obviously Taylor has come along and his throwing ability is second to none. But who's next in getting that ball into the line out? And that's where I have big concerns for the All Blacks. And what I saw from the Rugby Championship is they lost a lot of their own line out, which is troubling. When you go against squads like England, when you go against squads, like France, you have to be clinical with the line out. 23 to 26% of the international game of tries is scored from that kick to the corner off a penalty, rolling maul, and scoring that line out try. Sorry, that maul try post line out. If you're not clinical at the line out, if you can't connect with consistent accuracy, it's going to make things very difficult, especially when you get to the second half when the pressure mounts because scores are tight, sphincters are tight, and the crowd is on top of you because it's such an exciting game.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think we've got our work cut out for us, although Cody does present a very unique skill set and can really get the team going. The only substitutes that we have in this squad are going to be Tokiaho, which he's been struggling at late in with lineout specifically. I know what he can do in a scrum. I know what he can do in phase play, but he's been having a lot of difficulties with his lineout throws. And you've got George Bell coming to the mix, who is 23. He provides a lot of youth, but yeah, when it comes to hooker as well, yeah, I'm a bit uneasy about that.
Yeah. One quick question for you. What are your thoughts on Scott Barrett as captain?
I personally think it's the right choice. I've had a lot of time to think about this. I think if you think about the future, if you think about what Artie is doing next year, going overseas back to Japan, I think it's the right choice because I think Scott's going to be within this squad for the next 5 to 10 years. He's going to be a good piece in this. Whether he's going to be the lock to be in that squad in that number 4 and number 5 jersey moving forward, that's another debate about what we see coming into 2027. But I think at this point in time, I think Artie brings a lot of leadership in that vice captaincy role. You've also got, I believe, Geordie Barrett as a vice captain as well. I think they even each other out. And I think when you look at the press conferences, you see what Scott does with the referee, his candor, how he goes about his I guess political discussions, as you call them, with the referee. I think it's the right decision for now. Next year, though, I would definitely want to look at it and see who we've got in the mix and yeah, where it's all going. But I personally like it. What? Why do you not?
I don't know that he's assertive enough
Hmm.
with the officials in matches. And maybe it's just his demeanor's more reserved. I also have some concerns because at one point in his career, yellow cards were he was
Huge.
often shown the cheese. And if there's one thing, I don't mind a guy getting their nose in the dirt and into the ruck, but if you're going to make he was making to get thrown off and put on the sideline and put your team a man down, I think those errors were preventable, if you know what I'm saying, and they were too consistent how frequently, with the frequency, and that has a concern. Your captain needs to be on the pitch.
I definitely agree. I think previous years he was getting in the thick of it and he was doing a lot of things where they'd be head scratches and you'd be putting us in pretty compromising positions. I think he has grown from that. Is he perfect? Absolutely not. He's far from that. But I think at the moment, with how he's going and with how the referees are going about the game, I do agree assertiveness matters, but you got to pick your battles. I think it's something where we've seen captains come in hot, heavy, very expressive, and then referees just tell them, shoo, I'm not going to talk to you. So no, I agree. There's definite parts of his game and parts of his captaincy that may need to be improved. But yeah, I think with all things considered, I think we've got the right guy for the job for now. Reevaluate after the Northern Tour, and then we kind of go from there.
Yeah,
Well, let's
I like
let's
it.
chat briefly about the All Blacks 15 squad because I know this has been spoken about to be a pretty loaded second tier squad. I think we've already got a couple of guys who are pathway for fringe players and also some test ready players when injuries hit. So I think when we're talking about this, we've got some obvious experience when it comes to likes of David Harvili, a Dalton Papali'i, a Folau
Mhm.
Fakatava, even a Braden Enor, where over the past couple of years, I haven't enjoyed his gameplay immensely in certain fields, but there have been times where he's been a consistent player in that center area where he can get the job done for a team like this and go from there. So they've got some upcoming games against the Barbarians, England A, and Uruguay, three teams that I think they can definitely put on a good contest, especially Uruguay. So when you're looking at this team from, I guess, just an organizational point of view, do you think that this is an important team to have, the All Blacks 15?
Oh, without question. I'm going to go back to what I talked about earlier. Just 2 years time, you're looking at mounting one of the most important expeditions for that the All Blacks have ever encountered, and I say that simply because they haven't won since 2011, since 2015 on the double. Certainly, having the Springboks, who's their rugby championship foe, splitting with them this year and having them having won two on the trot. The pressure is mounting on the All Blacks, and they've got to have they've got to have depth. And we know that. We spoke about the 10 spot in 2011. They were going, they had to reach deep into the pockets to find a 10 to finish off the match, and Beaver showed up. So this is an important squad, and I think it's important for those young lads to get experience traveling out of the country and traveling in hostile environments like South America. Now, having said that, I think you have some steady hands that do have some All Blacks caps behind their names, and I'm thinking of Havili, as you mentioned, and Dalton Papali'i. I love Papa Lee. He's a guy that I could watch him play from any of those back row spots every day and twice on Sunday. I just enjoy his game. Frankly, a little surprised he isn't in the mix in the All Black squad, but you know, it's a competitive roster, and when you find yourself on the outs, you got to find your way back in, and you never know on a northern tour of that magnitude like the All Blacks are going on, he might find himself in service.
Yeah, I mean, you make an excellent point. I think a lot of people made that argument about Christian Leo Willie. I think he had a tremendous, I guess, first part of his All Blacks career, and he showed a lot of strength and a lot of ability that really was needed in that All Black squad. Whether it was Satiti coming back in, Karifi having the season that he has, and Artie just being Artie, them getting pushed out of the mix is it's up to the coaches to figure out. But speaking of coaches, just to end this part of the conversation, I'm really excited to see that you've got Jamie Joseph as head coach, who was, if anything, the second candidate to be the All Blacks coach outside of Razor. You've also got the guys like Corey Jane and Jamie McIntosh in the
Yes.
mix, who can bring so much wealth of experience to this squad and try and showcase like how to really take that next step from an All Blacks 15 to an All Blacks.
Yeah, I love seeing Corey Jane in the mix. I've always thought he was such an electric player when he played for the Hurricanes and, of course, played for the All Blacks. But how about the Whopper being in the mix? The cool thing is, he spent some time here in the States. So MLR fans here in the United States will be familiar with Jamie when he was playing with the Gilgronis out of Austin.
Man, that's a name I haven't heard in ages. I was actually talking to one of the guys from the corporate office in F45, because I coach at one of the locations in LA here. Shout out to F45 West LA, and got to catch up with him, and he was chatting to me, and he was figuring out I had an accent, and he was going, were you part of the Gilgronis or whatever it was? And I was like, man, I think I haven't heard that name in 3 years. It was kind of like a blast from the past. I mean, good old cocktail rugby teams there, so I definitely miss those a bit.
I got to dig that little flash from you when you were actually at a few cocktails yourself, and you were speaking to the quality or lack thereof of the actual Giltini.
Was not fun. Oh, I can't wait. Can't wait to have a couple of cervezas when I come over to Chicago, and we can catch up more. It's going to be great. But let's jump across the Tasman and let's chat about the Wallabies squad to finish off, because there are some surprises. No foreign-based stars, so no James O'Connor. We spoke about James O'Connor briefly on Monday on the Rugby Rant podcast, but we do have uncapped players like Aiden Ross, Akalani Thomas coming in. They've got a pretty brutal run when you look at it. Obviously, they've had a pretty impressive rugby championship where they were very competitive, but they've got Japan, they've got England, they've got Italy, they've got Ireland, and they've got France. So that's 5 tests in 5 weeks. What's your read on this squad here? Like, what are you thinking when you're seeing those teams being their opponents?
Well, if nothing else, tour for the British and Irish Lions to Australia was a really, really nice test for Australia. And I thought they came through swimmingly over the 3 tests, only having lost by a point if you take the aggregate, point totals from each game. I really think that they can play a physical game. The only trouble is with the Wallabies is, do they have the depth to play a physical game? That's my biggest concern with this group. Obviously, Ala Alatoa, a physical prop. You put on top of that guys like, Topu, Valentini, those guys are, of course, Harry Wilson, their captain, just hard, brutal, tough men. But we've also seen that they go through a little bit of an injury and niggle, and then the ability for them to play that physical game drops off considerably. The exception is Harry Wilson has proven himself to be an extremely durable 8-man, incredibly physical on the trot. But I'm really interested in watching the set of backs play. I think they have the ability to play quite an expansive game, which I love to see out of Australia, because that really is the kind of identity that I'm used to seeing them seeing them in. Being a guy who's 54 years old and was playing myself and watching, the Wallabies teams during the late 90s and early 2000s. Of course, Latho was here coaching the Hounds right here in my hometown. I know Latham quite well. And, when he was shining for those teams, I mean, their backs were second to none. I think they're going to need that physicality up against England and Ireland, obviously. France, we don't know what France is going to put out, do we? Yeah, that's the big question mark. What's France going to do? Are they going to put their number one squad out there? Or are they going to put their second tier squad out there like they did this summer? So it should be interesting to see what the Wallabies produce in the stretch of 5 matches.
A lot of people talk smack about that French second side or third side, about what do you want to call it, but they put on a show. I definitely agree with it. I think when New Zealand pundits were talking about the disrespect, the commercial appeal and things like that, it still ended up being a round of 3 great matches, and regardless of the score, I was really happy with that. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see who the French put on into their squad. But speaking of the back line, one big announcement that happened over the past couple of days is Carter Gordon coming from the NRL. He struggled with a bit of injuries. He was out of the mix in the NRL for a while. He is now signed with the Queensland Reds. He's from Brisbane. He went to school in Brisbane. He played club rugby in Brisbane. He's now back, and he's pulled a Suaalii. He hasn't been back in the mix, and now he's straight back into the Wallaby squad. So I think if you talk about expansive play, especially with Suaalii outside of him, you've got guys like Kellaway, Jorgensen. You've got a few people that you can really play an expansive game if you can get the front 8 really on the front foot and get their phase play to work in their favor. So I'm really excited to see how he goes when he's back in the mix. And you've also, like we were talking about before, you don't have the likes of James O'Connor, but you do have other players who can play pieces and really support that backline against some pretty talented sides.
I mean, that's the big question: is their back 3 going to be able to get quality ball, and their centers as well, right? Is there going to be quality ball that's going to be able to get out to them? Because I mean, I think their back 3, like even Peach, but Jorgensen, Potter, man, I mean, they're of such great quality. Right. And they have the ability to be those X factor players that can just flip the game on a dime and really put a defense on their back foot. But I think we saw with the British and Irish Lions series, if you can harry their 10, at least in that first match with Lina, if you can harry him and put him under pressure, it makes it pretty hard for him to get the ball to the back 3 and create those dangerous opportunities. So that's the big question: are they going to have the quality ball to be able to get those 3 Ferraris going?
Yeah, 100%. Well, the Wallabies have 5 weeks to prove if this rebuild is for real or if it's just another false dawn. It's going to be interesting. But I think the call out I'm going to make to Wallabies fans, or just fans in general, is what is the pass mark for this tour? Would it be 2 wins? Would it be 3? Is beating England all that matters, or getting a win over France something that they can see as a consolation prize if they play a second side or something like that? Let us know in the comments. We'll post this video online. But Rob, your personal opinion, what is a passing mark for this tour for the Wallabies?
Well, I'd expect them to beat Japan and Italy. I mean, for me, if they don't do that, it would be a massive disappointment if I was a Wallabies fan. And then I think you got to be able to pluck apart either England, Ireland, and France. I think the best opportunity is again, that big question mark is France. That might be your best opportunity. If they don't put out their number one side, it gives them a chance. And maybe Ireland too. Ireland's getting a little bit long in the tooth. Are there some chinks in the armor? Do the All Blacks soften up that toughened exterior and provide an opportunity for the Wallabies to sneak in there and get a win? I don't know, but I mean, for me, 3-2. Oh, sorry, they play 5 matches, so 3-2. So that would be the kind of mark for me of expectation for the Wallabies on this tour.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think those are great passing marks for the Wallabies, and I think if they can get it done, I think they can head into their next season and then a home World Cup in 2027, and they can see what they can produce. But we covered it all: the All Blacks squad, the All Blacks 15, the Wallabies as they head into a monster Northern tour. The last bit of information I want to share with you is something that I just saw on my social media before I jumped on this call, and it is regarding the topic we spoke about on the Rugby Rant on Monday. We're going to cut together some little clips here and there to add on the back end of this podcast, so stick around once we're done chatting about this But Rugby 360, the topic of what we spoke about on Monday, the NRL has just released that if there are any players that are caught negotiating, not even preliminary signing, just negotiations they can prove, that is a 10-year ban from playing any NRL. So not only is it something whereas like your contract's gone, like you can't play rugby league for 10 years unless you want to go play over in England with the Super League.
This could be a boon for the Wallabies going into 2027, right?
So we've got a lot of risk and reward factor over here, but hearing that before I jump into cutting into the podcast that we spoke about on Monday, hearing that, do we now say that Rugby 360 is pretty much dead, or do you think it's still got some legs?
I think it'll have some legs, at least to get a start. The question is, does it have any legs beyond one season? You'll be able to find guys that are over the hill or guys that had their international experience have moved on. There will be enough that I think are available, but beyond season one, will it have the legs to move beyond that? I don't know. So I really am.
We'll stick around, everyone. We're going to chuck some little snippets of the Rugby Rant podcast in here. But before I do that and cut to that, Rob, it was amazing having you on your debut episode of the Bonus Point podcast. Mate, I knew what I was getting into when I was inviting you on this podcast, but you hit above and beyond with your insights into these squads, and I can't wait to have you on the podcast again. Thank you so much for being on, mate.
Always happy to do it, man. I love what you do. It's awesome stuff, and I love the fact that the Bonus Point and the Rugby Rant work together to promote rugby. It's not about egos, it's about amigos, and it's about creating more amigos in the rugby community. Who gives a stash as to, who gets more likes, clicks, or views? It's all about promoting the game, brother.
Man, I got to put that on a t-shirt. That's a great slogan right there. I love it. Well, for everyone listening, thank you so much. Hit follow on the Bonus Point Rugby podcast on Spotify, Instagram, TikTok. We'll be posting some clips from this chat, but stay tuned. We're going to now cut to a clip of the Rugby Rant podcast so we can chat all about Rugby 360.
All right. So we're talking Rugby 360. And yes, I stole this, folks. Bold frontier, risky game changer. But more than that, we're going to be talking about some things that are much more specific. 3 areas that we're going to plug into right now. And that's number one. The big question is player interest. Like, what kind of players might be interested in being lured away from their professional contracts in other competitions? Okay, so that's number one. And in with that, player welfare, because that's one of the considerations when you're talking about this new league. Some questions about player welfare have been thrown out. The other piece is marketability. With every new league, there's a big question of can they get a bigger market share of the rugby community and the sporting community? So that's the big question insofar as, that's what drives revenue. But then finally, fan interest, and that's tied to revenue, of course, because that's butts and seats. But more than that, are they going to be able to get peak fan interest and engage fans from around the world as we talk about this model? So let me just kind of sum up some important things about Rugby 360 before we move on. From what I've gathered, it's a union competition. As I said, Mike Tyndall is the face. He's the co-founder, along with Eddie Jones and Chris Webb, are there to recruit players. As I said, there's some money coming in from the Middle East, kind of like the Live structure. Some people from Live, I think the lawyer for Live Golf is tied into this. So supposedly some details. October of 2026 is going to be the first year, 6 male teams, 4 female teams. And then in 2027, it'll go for a 12 event competition that will run from April to September. And they're going to grow in 2027 to 8 male teams in 2028. They're supposed to have 16 events that run from April, September with, I believe, a gap for the international window. The initial teams that have been talked about are, going to be from London, Miami, Tokyo, Dubai, Boston, Cape Town, Lisbon, and Madrid. It'll be registered to the UAE Rugby Football Union. That's United Arab Emirates. And there's one point that we'll bring in as players are supposedly going to own their own IP, not by a team or R360. There will be a draft in July of 2026. And this is interesting. Players will not have to reside in the franchise location, but they will be able to choose their country of residence. So those are kind of some of the skeleton structure of this league. And I'm sure that both Karen and TJ will kind of pull in elements that I've just mentioned as they talk about it. So first, let's tackle the question of players, right? And player interest and player welfare. So the big question, will this league, and I'll start with Karen, will this league be able to pull players in to make it a cornerstone league rugby? I mean, it's rugby union, but a rugby competition is probably the better way to put it in the rugby world.
Well, there's a couple of things there. First of all, not if they want to play internationally. 8 out of the top 10 countries have their unions have released a joint statement saying that they have more questions than answers and that they do not back this league, that they feel like this league is counterintuitive to what rugby is trying to do in terms of its growth, and certainly that it interrupts the national window. No, it doesn't interrupt the national window, but it does interrupt competition windows, certainly Champions Cup, etc. And that it's so far a lot of really great bells and whistles. A lot of what you said, Rob, was really like attractive to potential players. But how much of that is it's too good to be true? That is my point number two, which is the players' unions. The RFU has come out and said, guys, I don't really think that this is something that you should consider, especially if you want to continue your international career. But also, there are a lot of questions, and player welfare is right at the top of that. What if paydays can't happen? If you look at, pro rugby, people weren't paid. Players played many games and then it had to walk away. There's just so many questions, and it's such an expensive undertaking. And there's all of these kinds of guarantees being made. Mike Tyndall sat down with 200 players. Apparently, there were kind of like pre-contracts signed by these 200 players. I think it was more of a meeting. He might have had some handshakes. Nobody knows, because they're not saying anything, because a lot of the players don't want to say anything because they don't want to upset their union, and they're kind of like waiting to see what happens. But I think personally, the players that this would really appeal to the most are the ones that have basically aged out of international, or have found themselves out of favor internationally, and who aren't done yet. There's still a draw. There's still popular players. There's still star quality, so people will want to go see them. But they're no longer really even thinking in terms of international playing time anymore. So that's all.
Yeah, and I think you raised some great points, particularly the aged out factor. Who does it appeal to? Well, if you're not going to be playing for your national team any longer, and there's money to be made, then there's obvious appeal there. But if you have an opportunity to still play for your national team, then you might be willing to sacrifice some of that money for the other things that you gain, the other monetary gains that you get from playing with your national team. And I'm curious, from your standpoint, TJ, having been both plugged into Australia and New Zealand and the United States, but in particular, the Pacific Islands and some of those players down there, is there interest from players in the South Pacific, from Australia, New Zealand, in this type of model?
I think there's definitely interest, whether it is I guess, preliminary or something that's just going to be talked about versus like actual interest, like they're ready to sacrifice their contracts and their well-being and how they support their families is a whole nother thing. I think the fact that you see the instability of professional rugby at the moment, where the club game is cash strapped, like more than a dozen professional outfits over the years have crumbled. I'm thinking of the Melbourne Rebels in Australia. I'm thinking of the Wasps out in the UK. A lot of top flight rugby programs have just crumbled underneath. So I think it's that point where people are sitting here going, where's my security? Like, this potentially could all crumble around me anyway. But I wholeheartedly agree on what Gaz was saying. I think it's when you're looking at players that are interested in this possibility, it could be crossover athletes. So people coming from potentially rugby league, potentially even American football. You had guys in the past like Nate Ebner, who's played for the Sevens, who has also played for the Patriots. I'm thinking of Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, who had a stint in New Zealand playing for the All Blacks, and now he's back in rugby league. He's definitely on the back end of his career. Definite fringe players like a Peter Umaga Jensen, who's currently playing over in Japan, who was looked at as one of the greatest centers to play in New Zealand at one point, and he couldn't even get a sniff in the All Blacks at the moment, even if he wanted to. So there's definitely players there who don't have international, I guess, interests or opportunities to go and give that a go. But I think one example I want to utilize is that we never know what can happen and when your opportunity can come. Is John Alfor. He's a 40-year-old prop that was barely playing rugby. He was playing over in France, and he was about to retire, and then he got a call up to go play for the Crusaders, and he almost won a championship with them. So you never know when your time can come. We see in the All Blacks a bunch of centers and scrum halves and other people were going down, getting injured, and we had to scrape the bottom of the barrel to get people in there to play scrum half for the All Blacks. So I think if you're looking at the potential opportunity of playing for your international side, which unless you've called it quits on your own time, you never know when your time can come, whether you're on the back end of your career or you're still in it. I know a lot of guys are looking at the cash aspect and trying to provide for their families, but they won't sacrifice now that New Zealand, England, France, South Africa, all these unions have stepped in. They won't sacrifice the potential to play for the international team. I think if you look at it, there's again, two sides of the coin. So I think if you look at the 3-month stint, obviously reduced workload. So you get a little more time to yourself. You can focus on rehab, prehab, all those types of things. If you do have any niggling injuries, you can also, I think outside of the financial security that is supposedly being offered, what I've heard is that the global exposure and the player branding that players can take opportunity from, they can take outside deals. They can utilize Rugby 360 as an opportunity to set up their next 10, 20 years, whether that be different brand opportunities, things like that they wouldn't be able to get through their provincial clubs. But on the flip side of that, the things that I like to think about that will really suffer a huge detriment is the grassroots and the pathway for grassroots. I think if you open this floodgate, we don't know what's going to happen. If we take governance out of it, if we take just a streamlined process, I've been on this podcast multiple times talking about how much I have detested in the past USA Rugby's pathway and how there's not a clear one, and it's definitely gotten better over the years. I think it's going to be very difficult to make an argument how the grassroots and those pathways won't get impacted, and the travel demands. If all these places that they're going to in this small period, they have to travel all over, it's going to be pretty tough for the player welfare to be, I guess, at tip top. So yeah, I think there's definitely arguments for both. And I think when you think about the financial capacity, I'm thinking about the opportunities for the women who don't necessarily get those big paychecks, who could really benefit from this. But yeah, again, there's just too many things that I look at that I just feel unsure and just uneasy about.
Interesting. So I've got a question. We're talking about fan engagement. And to me, what draws why is it that the Six Nations arguably is one of the best rugby union competitions? Now I know I'm going to get kickback from TJ, but I mean, just in terms of attention, the Six Nations is one of the best rugby union comps, right? And one can argue that in part that comes from national allegiances and national rivalries.
To your point, and to Karen's point multiple times, it's like it's embedded so deeply in rugby culture, in these certain competitions where even me, like you said, Rob, not my favorite competition to watch because I'm a rugby championship man through and through. And even though I don't believe the Netflix documentary was done the best it could, I'm still sitting there thinking about the Italy match of them talking about like they get to beat this team for the first time in how many years because they toiled and toiled and they pulled their community together, they pulled their rugby program together, and they were able to get on top of that team. We have no allegiances. We have nothing that we can pull from that really has that history, that heart that we can go from. Could it be replicated and then we could become fans of those leagues? Yeah, potentially. Everything has that potential. But yeah, I just don't see if you put them next to each other, it's not apples and apples, it's apples and oranges.
I was going to say there'd have to be a lot of creativity involved. They'd have to like write the script, wouldn't they? They'd have to create rivalries. They'd have to create cups. You know, these two teams are going for this cup, and these two players, they spent 20 years bashing each other on the pitch, and now they're head to head, and they'd have to really play that up. And I'm sure with the money that's involved, and Tyndall's no dummy. I mean, and he's been around the game his whole entire life. I'm sure that they will create these things, but I don't want disingenuous. I want the genuine article, and I want the McCormick Cup. Like that's what I want. Like, I don't want something that that is manufactured.
I think Karen's thrown a really, it's a saying back home, it's a spanner in the works, like a wrench in the works. I think if this is kind of the thing that I'm thinking about, if we make this the WWE of rugby and then we script all the games and we market the promos and do everything, that's one reason why I'll go and watch it. If you can, even though you know it's fake, you still have fans coming back and you watch these things because they're the cliffhangers and the moments are so good. You sit there and go, how can I not watch that?
I can't wait to watch Joe Marler slap somebody across the scrum before the engagement.
Mate, you would go and watch that. I swear. Come on. Like that would be insane. So, I mean, Karen, get on the horn and tell them, be like, if they want to make it happen, the first couple of years, it's got to be all scripted WWE style where they go in there and they get it all done.
Honestly, WWE came into my head. Honestly, I was thinking that. I was totally thinking Hulk Hogan off the ropes. Like, it's like, but that's just not for me. I mean, I'm just giant eye roll the whole time. Like, whatever.
All right, guys, that is our show for this week. If you're interested in checking out the Rugby Rant podcast and checking out that episode talking all about Rugby 360, obviously you got a couple of snippets here and there in this episode, but the full episode, go support them on Patreon. They are also on all your major platforms, and you can follow them on social media as well. Great group of lads that are really helping grow the sport out here in North America, and I've got plenty of time for them. So we will see you again next week, chatting about NPC finals and everything going on in the Pacific for rugby. We'll see you soon.